Uh, Hi,
Hi.
Noam.
Hello?
Can you see us?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can. I can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear us?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. So welcome, Noam, to India and Global Left, and
What?
thank you so much for your time. We feel honored to be with you.
Very pleased to be with you.
So since Noam needs no introduction, we would prefer to save our time by skipping that bit. So, Noam, one of the lessons we learned from you is we have a primary responsibility to speak out against the wrong things in the society we live in. Of course, then we can speak about injustice elsewhere. Taking a cue from it, we intend to keep our questions hinged on India with a global perspective. So, our first question is on anarchism. Anarchism as a political strategy and its relationship with the state. Traditionally, anarchists have considered the state to be merely an instrument of coercion. This emerged out of the 19th century analysis of the state that had little welfare component in it. You have written in your book, as well as the preface and introduction to Rocker and Gurian's book, that anarchism is not merely an abstract philosophy, but is rooted in political reality and historical contingency. Your position vis-a-vis the need to defend social security against the onslaught of neoliberalism is accurate and well known. We want to revisit the topic from a particular lens of Dalit politics in India. With a few exceptions, Dalit assertion has been historically located in a socialist template. And yet, the socialism that Dalits, including Dr. Ambedkar, advocate is often of the statist variety. The underlying logic is that the state, despite its tilt towards capital and caste, offers a minimum democratic space within which the Dalits resist. In the absence of the state, the caste fascism can be uglier, particularly when we are not living in a time of social revolution that may annihilate caste at one stroke. So the question is, how does one revisit the state from an anarchist perspective, taking on board the issue of minority rights that a state marginally tends to protect?
First of all, we should be clear about anarchism. It's not a religion. The as you pointed out, the anarchists of the 19th century regarded the state as a major oppressor. They were talking about the 19th century state. They were not talking about a world in which multinational corporations, financial institutions, uh, huge concentrations of capital have taken over the primary decision-making role in the society. And the states, in fact, are largely their servants. That's a different world. So the principle is not opposition to the state, it's opposition to autocratic concentrations of power. Well, they've changed over the years. So today, if you look at the neoliberal era, the neoliberalism was basically a phase of class war by the business world conducted against the working class and general population. And the idea was to remove the reformist state, the social democratic state, grew out of the New Deal, European social democracy post-war, which did have measures in it brought in by militant popular action, but measures which were beneficial to the population. And the business offensive was designed to eliminate those, reduce welfare programs, reduce social programs, move decision-making from the state, which has some responsiveness to popular pressure. So to eliminate that and shift decisions entirely to the hands of totally unaccountable private tyrannies, which in their own associations and groupings will be able to impose a business-friendly social environment at the expense of the general population. Well, that's not the situation that 19th century, early 20th century anarchists faced. It's a different situation. So, and it's had its effects. There's been massive robbery of the population over the past 40 years. Rough estimate is probably 70 or 80 trillion dollars of transfer of wealth from the working class and middle class to the top fraction of 1% of the population. It's a very effective class war, and it's had its effects. I mean, you see it in India, we see it in the United States, saw it in Latin America with 2 decades of lost decades, sharp increase in poverty, and so on. Now the question is how to deal with that. Today's anarchists, I think, will want to deal with the urgent problems that people face, and at the same time move towards developing institutions and understanding which will lead in a not too long period, we hope, to a real total reconstruction of society along other grounds. The state is less of an issue than it was when autocratic states dominated social policy. We've moved from that era. So then comes the question, well, how do we deal with today's problems? The neoliberal problems are very serious. They have harmed the world population enormously. They've left a residue of anger, resentment, isolation, atomization, as they were intended to do, weakened seriously the labor movement, the main mode of defense against capitalist attack and class war, unending class war. All of this has to be reconstituted. And there are forces, they're significant, but they're not really, they're multidimensional. A lot of it is young people pursuing very proper goals of race, gender, so on, but marginalizing class issues, the ones that the business world concentrates on. So the uneven conquest has become even more so because of diversion of much of the left to important issues, but not these issues. Makes it easier to splinter and divide and so on. So all of those are problems that have to be overcome.
Thank you so much, Noam. Our next question is on Kashmir. So Article 370 gave Kashmir a modicum of autonomy while paradoxically extending New Delhi's grip over Kashmir. The recent reading down of the article is clearly a case of New Delhi's aggression against Kashmiris. The discussion that followed within Liberal Center is exclusively on the need to restore Article 370. While that is important, given the humiliation that reading down of Article 370 has inflicted on the Kashmiris, we see a narrowing down of the Kashmiri conversation to the sole issue of Article 370. As a result, the larger questions on freedom, military excesses, and right to self-determination have gone out of discussion tables. As someone who has spoken for rights of oppressed people, the Palestinian people, for instance, what is your take on the relative absence of Kashmir in conversations within the global left? And secondly, what is your message to the people of India who considers any substantive discussion on Kashmir to be a seditious act of anti-nationalism?
The Modi government's sharp extension of severe Indian repression in Kashmir, they didn't begin it. but they sharply extended it to essentially taking over Kashmir, much the way Israel took over Palestine. It's rather similar. Or Morocco took over Western Sahara with US support. These are all similar. They're all criminal acts, very severe. You can say that others are involved too. Pakistan's record is ugly and brutal, but nothing comparable to what India has been doing, particularly since the fraudulent elections of the late 80s and the sharply increased repression. Modi's carried it far further. Kashmir is partially repressed, occupied territory. This should be totally intolerable to the international community. Obviously, it's not, just as the crushing of Palestine is not, just as the illegal takeover of Western Sahara is not. Governments are not humanitarian organizations. They support power interests. Compare the power of Kashmiris to the power of India. Okay, you have the answer. It was the same in other cases. But these things can be won. There are some amazing cases. One of the greatest imbalances in modern times, which has been won by the victims, is the Indonesian invasion of East Timor. US-backed Indonesian invasion, backed by the Western countries, overwhelmingly the United States. Speak of imbalance. This is 600,000 people who nobody ever heard of. Indonesia, major power, huge resources, a darling of the West since 1965, when the ultra-right took over, carried out extraordinary massacre, killed hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people. It just became the absolute darling of the West, of investment community and so on, huge resources. And then, of course, the United States gave them the green light to go and invade East Timor and destroy it and take it over. It's the worst genocide relative to population since the World War. How could the Timorese possibly resist? I mean, press refused to cover it. Nobody would talk about it. But it worked. With 25 years of hard, dedicated effort, it was possible to get a popular reaction, possible to compel Washington to call the troops off. Enough pressure on Clinton in 1999, so he quietly gave the Indonesian government the order to say, it's over, get your troops out. And of course, they instantly obeyed. That's what power is. Well, not saying that's identical to Kashmir, but it's enough to show that things can be done with hard, dedicated labor. This is perhaps the most extreme example I've ever seen. I was personally involved in it for many years, but it seemed hopeless, totally hopeless, outlandish, but it worked. And I think popular activism can have an effect, maybe a decisive effect, in the Kashmir situation too. I think the Timor case is a good example to show things aren't hopeless. Even in an example like that, with overwhelming power imbalance, whole world virtually supporting Indonesia, including the third world. But it worked.
Thank you so much, Noam. So this brings us to the subject of Islamophobia, particularly in South Asia and also China. Sinhala Buddhist nationalism's assault on minority rights has had a long history in Sri Lanka. The anti-Muslim movement in Sri Lanka paradoxically emerged towards the end of the civil war in 2009. Apart from violent social media campaigns, hate speeches, and everyday low-intensity harassments, there have been violent attacks on Muslims over the years. In 2019, the Easter Day suicide bombing by groups associated with the ISIS led to the violent retaliatory attacks on Muslims. There are reports on arbitrary arrests, talks on burqa ban, closing of madrasas, and regulations over Islamic book. During the pandemic, the government imposed forced cremations on the bodies of Muslims. Islamophobia has become a convenient plank to win elections for parties that cater to majoritarianism. And this pattern repeats with chilling monotony in India, Myanmar, and China, whose insidious and violent attacks, as well as legal discriminations against Muslims, are much more well known. How do you look at the problem of, if I may say, Asianization of modern Islamophobia, something whose roots is arguably tied to Western imperialism?
Well, there's a long background, 1,000 years, in fact. If you look over the sweep of world history, the war against Muslims goes back 1,000 years. Actually, Crusades, Russia and its Muslim conquest of Muslim territories, the West's wars, colonial wars, were very substantially against Muslim territories. There's a wonderful book about this by a fine historian, William Polk, P-O-L-K, died recently, a major historian. It's called Crusaders and Jihadis. It's about the 1,000-year war of the North, including Russia, but mostly the West, against Islam. India's joining in strenuously with Modi's moves to create a Hindu ethnocracy, dismantling Indian secular democracy and having an effect. It's not only there. Islamophobia in Europe is shocking, utterly shocking. You have to be there to see it. I've visited the banlieue, they're called, the so-called suburbs of Paris, where the Muslim population is concentrated. They suffer really, they're not being murdered, but they're suffering humiliation, repression, vituperation, barring from jobs, can't even make it into the city. Really ugly situation. And it's worse than the United States. And it's bad enough here. The anti-Muslim measures, particularly Trump, of course, exploited it for personal and political reasons. But there's a strain that's always been there. So yes, India is an extreme case. Burma, Myanmar is another, but it's all over, has a 1,000-year background. It's and of course, it's deeply rooted in the culture, especially the Christian cultures, which have and of course, by now the militant Hindu cultures wasn't always like that. India used to be a pretty tolerant place if you go back far enough, but it can always be brought out. So yes, it's a huge problem. Some of the ugliest things that are happening in the world are right in the Mediterranean, when people from the mostly Muslim African areas, which have been devastated by European imperialism, people are fleeing through Libya, trying to get out of the wreckage. The European powers are driving them back, sinking ships in the Mediterranean, thousands dying. Europe has gone so far as to set up military bases deep in Africa, Niger, poorest country in the world, perhaps. Military bases from Europe where troops are established to try to prevent people from fleeing the misery inflicted by hundreds of years of European violence, keep them from fleeing from the misery to the European, to the Mediterranean, where we'll have to send them back or let their boats sink and kill them. It's happening right before our eyes. That's civilized Europe. U.S. is doing the same on its border, but it happens to be mostly Latin Americans there. People of the U.S. is crushed in Central America, fleeing the wreckage, or Haiti. You know, that's I mean, wherever there's misery, and this is going to expand, of course, as global warming continues. It's going to be an incredible migrant crisis in South Asia. People start fleeing the low-lying plains in Bangladesh. What's going to happen to them? India itself is going to be largely unlivable. I mean, temperatures in Rajasthan have reached 50 degrees Celsius over the summer. It's not the United States where everybody can put in a fancy air conditioner. This is poor peasant, you know. Well, all of this is happening too. So the migrations are going to be far worse. They're going to exacerbate ethnic conflict. We've seen it happen everywhere. Darfur, for example, the atrocities in Darfur are largely a refaction to the fact that nomadic tribes had to leave their grazing grounds because of global warming and moved into agricultural areas where, of course, conflict at once developed, ended up virtually genocidal. Syria, kind of the same. Unprecedented drought, result of global warming, drove peasants into the cities, aroused conflict, made economic problems. As soon as anything went wrong, blew up into massive atrocities. When you have delicate situations like that, it doesn't take long for it to blow up into a huge massacres and atrocities like Gujarat or what's happening in India right now. I think it's going to take a lot of work to try to hold the dams against bitter ethnic violence and repression, a lot of it directed against Muslims, with a long background of 1,000 years of war.
Thank you, Noam. So the next question will be, the global movement for nuclear disarmament seems to have lost some of its momentum in the last century. In the meantime, countries like India and Pakistan have armed itself in nuclear weapons. Political commentators from South Asia seem to underemphasize the danger of nuclear flashpoint in South Asia. You have written in most of your books that it has been a miracle by which humanity has so far survived the menace of nuclear war. So given the lack of public discourse on nuclear disarmament, particularly in South Asia, we would like you to speak on the subject.
Well, the problem of growing nuclear war is extremely serious. The India-Pakistan case is one example. Actually, this conflict is captured beautifully in a book of Arundhati Roy's. I've forgotten which one, but there's a passage somewhere where she describes the fighting up in the glaciers between India and Pakistan. And she says it much more eloquently than I can, but what she describes is the melting glaciers, revealing as they melt the skulls and helmets of the Indian and Pakistani soldiers who are killing each other over a meaningless line, 12,000 feet in the air, while meanwhile the earth is giving them the answer. You're going to kill all of you yourselves by warming the environment. That image of the glaciers receding and revealing the skulls and rifles tells you a lot about the world. Pakistan is destroying itself by trying to match or overmatch Indian armaments, which it obviously can't do. It's a much poorer country. They desperately need the funds to rebuild the country, but they're expending it in armaments and even terrorist activities at the line of control to counter India. They were supporting the Taliban as a counter to India. I mean, and India itself is developing nuclear weapons, expanding conflicts. Right now, India, as perhaps you've seen, has blocked the efforts of the China-based Shanghai Cooperation Organization to do something to move constructively towards the Afghan humanitarian crisis, the horrible crisis in Afghanistan. Huge numbers of people are just facing starvation and death. Well, the China-based Central Asian system, mostly out of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, they include Russia, the Central Asian states, India and Pakistan, Iran now as a member. They're under Chinese influence, I suppose. They're trying to move towards some kind of accommodation with the Taliban government, trying to pressure them to become less repressive, more inclusive, shift their economy away from opium to Afghanistan's huge mineral resources, try to work with them somehow to improve life for the Afghan people. India blocked it. It's opposed. India is working with the United States, its master. The United States is withholding funds to Afghanistan, pressuring the IMF and the World Bank not to give loans. India is joining in, saying we have to sanction the Afghan people. Doesn't hurt the ruler's sanctions, it hurts the people. And but we have to do that. I don't know exactly what Modi's reasoning is, but basically it comes out, follow the orders of the master in Washington. Well, that's an example right now. Policies that are deeply inhuman, crazy in the long run, but serve short-term power interests. That's India, Pakistan. They have to work together. A similar case, much more serious, is the United States, China. The United States is China for the last years. They're doing things they shouldn't be doing a lot. But basically, the main thrust of their policy is to extend investment and development. That's the overwhelming part of it. While the United States is overthrowing governments, expanding its military, China has been investing, developing Central Asia, mainly Belt and Road Initiative. It's going to reach as far as Turkey, inroad into Europe. It's moving into Africa, even beginning to move into Latin America, which the United States is desperately trying to stop trade development operations. Meanwhile, the United States, increasingly under Biden, is carrying out highly provocative acts which increase the threat of a really terminal nuclear war. US strategic policy, 2018, continued under Biden. Policy is explicitly to prepare for a war against China and Russia simultaneously. Total insanity. A war with either China or Russia would destroy everything, including the United States. There are conflicts in the South China Sea. The US response is send a naval armada into contested areas. How about diplomacy and negotiations? No, that's too wishy-washy for us. We're not sissies like that. We send in naval armadas. China reacts by sending the Air Force to penetrate Taiwanese airspace. Just a bill, the United States just agreed to send a fleet of advanced nuclear submarines to Australia. It's not even a threat to China because they won't even be operational for 15 years, at which point China will have increased its military forces so as to counter them. So just let's escalate the conflict to demonstrate that we're going to rule the world by force. That's what's happening, okay? And India-Pakistan is serious enough, but sooner or later, India and Pakistan are going to be in conflict over the declining water sources from the Himalayas. If they're poised to attack each other with nuclear weapons, can go in that direction. They can wipe each other out. It won't be just like what Arundhati described. It'll be all of South Asia, which is meanwhile collapsing under the threat of global warming. It has to take action. It's a disease spreading over the world. Now, how serious this is, we can take a look at Europe, civilized Europe. Just take what happened in the last couple of weeks. And in fact, it's going on right now as we talk. On August 9th, the IPCC International, they came out with their latest report, very dire report, much more serious than other ones. The message was very clear. We have to start reducing use of oil, reducing it right now. Can't wait. Have to start reducing fossil fuels right away and do it systematically year by year until we've effectively phased them out by mid-century. That's essential for survival. That's the message. So what is Europe doing? It's pressuring the oil-producing countries to increase production. The United States is in the lead. Europe's going along. In other words, let's race to the precipice as quickly as possible because it's politically good for us. It'll lower gas prices. Okay.
Thank you so. Sorry. Thank you so much, Noam. We have the last 5 minutes, so we try to ask one last final question. Is that okay with you? One last final question.
Yeah, well, last one.
Yep. So this is on on public education. So in the post-World War II era, there was a ubiquitous belief in the developing world that the state has a primary responsibility in education. Countries like China and Vietnam did miraculously well in primary and secondary education, while others like India did reasonably well in, say, higher education, all under the state's aegis. But in the recent years, there is an unabashed assault on public education in India. Private schools have become the most desired choice of elites and middle class in primary and secondary schools. The recent new education policy has categorically championed the US models tied to the absurd logic of Ivy Leagues in India. What's your take on this about the increasing assault, particularly in poor countries like India?
Well, this is part of a global class war by the business world against the general population of the world. Has a name. It's called neoliberalism. Has nothing to do with markets. All the rhetoric is garbage. It's a class war to try to destroy any part of modern society that benefits the population and ensure instead that policy is directed towards the interests of the very rich and the corporate sector. That's class war, one-sided class war. Have to recognize that the business world are basically Marxists, vulgar Marxists. They believe in class war, bitter class war. Values are inverted, but they accept the general logic. It's different in different countries. It's extreme in the United States. Well, in fact, the last Secretary of Education under Trump was openly, publicly dedicated to destroying the public education system. And the United States has a deeper history than India. The United States was in the lead in the world in initiating mass public education. It goes back to the late 19th century. It's one of the great contributions of American democracy to the world. It took a long time for Europe to follow. Europe didn't have that until after the Second World War began. Stratified education, same at the university level. U.S. had public, excellent higher education, the state colleges, state university system. This goes way back to the 19th century. Now, in the neoliberal period, there's a strenuous effort to eliminate it. Milton Friedman, the economic guru, was working openly, publicly, with segregationists from the South to try to, for the segregationists, the goal was to keep racially segregated schools. And their technique was to try to shift it to the public sector, private sector. Public pays, of course, pays and taxes and so on, but you shift it to the private sector, and then you say, oh, we're not racist, we just want religious schools, which happened by accident to keep out blacks. Friedman was pushing that very hard as part of his effort to eliminate the public education system, which is just part of a much more general effort to eliminate anything that's of benefit to the general population, because policy is supposed to cater to the very rich and the corporate sector. That's the whole history of so-called neoliberalism. The trade agreements, just about every aspect of it. Carefully designed, carefully thought out, very sensible. And what you describe in India is part of it. Why should we have education for the general population? Why not just educate the very rich and the rest can be servants? And a lot more profit in that. Much better for the very rich. India, of course, has horrendous inequality. It's shocking to a visitor in India to see the combination of extraordinary poverty and unspeakable wealth. I mean, I've seen it myself. You know it much better than I do, but it's just, so let's destroy public education and make it more extreme in the benefit of the masters. So yes, it's terrible. It's attacking the universities, your university, all of them, because they shouldn't be free, independent institutions. People might think, they might challenge, they might carry out such subversive ideas as maybe people matter. We don't want to hear that kind of stuff. So let's get rid of it. Same happening here. I happen to be teaching right now in a state university. The legislature, Republican, wants to defund the university, doing everything they can to cut it out so that it'll just become maybe a business school or a school where you train people to work in the electronics industry, but no humanities, no social studies, none of this subversive stuff. Just train people to be automata who will work in quietly and obediently for the masters. Public schools, get rid of them. Impose one or another form of privatization, religious schools and so on. The Supreme Court in the United States, which is now far to the right, has recently been authorizing state public funding for religious schools. Total violation of the Constitution, but who cares? It's all part of the same system. So yes, and it has a name. The name for liberalism is class war. That's what it should be called. I mean,
thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Noam, for your time. We appreciate it so much, and we wish you more power and a long life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good to talk to you.